After thousands of cases over 2 decades, Abraham Lincoln's final courtroom drama elevated him to the national stage, and as the book Lincoln's Last Trial points out, propelled him to the presidency. I'm pleased to welcome co-author of the new book, Chief Legal Affairs Anchor at ABC News and host of Live PD on A&E, Dan Abrams. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Alex.
So it really seemed like we didn't have a whole lot more to discover about Lincoln, but obviously here we are. How did you come into the possession of this transcript?
So my co-author, David Fisher, came to me and said, you know, there's this transcript out there. It's the only transcript that exists of a Lincoln case, and it was only discovered in 1989 in the garage of the great-grandson of the defendant in what was a high-profile, really compelling murder trial. And of course, my first reaction was, come on. It can't be that the only transcript that exists of a Lincoln case has become a footnote to history, and yet that is exactly what it had become. So David and I dug in to the trial and also to Lincoln, the lawyer leading up to the trial, to tell the story of the murder trial of Peachy Quinn Harrison that came 9 months before Lincoln got the Republican nomination.
Right, and transcripts were actually very rare in 1859. How did this case become transcribed and why?
So the transcriber, Robert Hitt, had actually been Lincoln's transcriber in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. In fact, in one of the debates, Lincoln refused to start the debate until Robert Hitt was sitting in his spot at the front of the stage so he could hear every word. Lincoln recognized how valuable and important that could be. So he recommended to the family in this case that they, in essence, hire Robert Hitt to transcribe the trial, something that wasn't done very often, recommending that because if and when he was convicted, that they could then use that for their appeal. So that's how Robert Hitt got involved with this, and he sort of was creating his own form of shorthand back then, and would then go back and write it out, and you see in the transcript that there are blanks and cross-outs and spaces where he wasn't able to catch every single word, but he did a remarkable job considering he was sitting in there with a steel-tipped pen. Right,
and even though this takes place back in the late 1800s, it reads a lot like a trial might read today. What are some similarities and differences that you see from that trial to something that happens today?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of similarity with regard to the law. So the law of self-defense was pretty much the same then as it is today. Is the person in reasonable fear of grave bodily injury or death? Some of the rules of evidence were similar on hearsay. I think a lawyer from today would recognize a courtroom back then and vice versa. The big differences, I think, were that courtrooms back then were much more casual. They're more regimented today. Lawyers could argue from personal experience. They could try and bond with the jurors about where they live and talk about their own experiences in a way that you really can't do today. And I think that Lincoln was really able to use that to his advantage because Lincoln was sort of at his best when he was talking to jurors, when he was bonding with them as people. And so the more casual atmosphere that existed in courtrooms back then allowed him to do that in a way that he might not be able to quite do today.
Right, and there's so much to talk about, including your collaboration with David Fisher, of course, but in the last 20 seconds or so I have left, what was it about this case that really propelled Lincoln to that national stage and make him a real consideration for president?
So a combination of the amount of coverage that it got. This is post-Lincoln-Douglas debates. It's a year later. Lincoln wasn't in the papers, et cetera, much. And I think a lot of the people involved in this case became critical members of his team in 1860. So in the 22nd version, those are the two key reasons. But there's a whole series of things, I think, when you read the book, you see how this helped take him there and how this was a really important point in his career with everything to lose when he took the case.
Well, clearly there's a whole lot to learn, a whole lot to read, whether you're a historian or you're not. I mean, it's an important part of our history. And congratulations on the book. Can't wait to see what you do next, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. We'll be right back.